and found an empty basket to dump my purchases into. "What?" Calvin replied, his expression one of mock offense. "Girl, you are just jealous because you can't pull off the look." "So jealous," I replied sarcastically. I was perfectly happy in my jean shorts and plain black tank top. Nobody needed to know my mom had spent a fortune for both articles of clothing. If it were up to me, I'd wear clothes from the local consignment shop, thank you very much. People were going hungry these days, and obviously many of them were right here in Harrisburg. That was way creepier IMO than Little Miss Sunshine jonesing for cheap salty grease. Calvin poked his nose into my basket. "Would you mind telling me exactly how white girls from the north make s'mores? Where I come from, we use marshmallows." Damn it. I'd forgotten to grab a bag when we were in the candy aisle. "Come on," Calvin replied and reached for my basket. He set it atop his lap and followed me as I sprinted back toward aisle 8. "Skylar, slow your ass down," Calvin whined, but when I did, he zoomed past me, laughing. "Oh, it's on," I said, pushing to keep up. "I could totally beat you in a race." It was Calvin's turn to roll his eyes when we both had to slow for oncoming traffic. "Oh yeah? How much you want to bet?" "I'll have to think about it," I answered, and that's when the screaming started. Calvin grabbed for my arm. "What the?" I turned to see a little old lady frozen in fear at the end of aisle 8. Then other voices joined the chorus, including a woman reciting the Our Father in Spanish. "Don't," Calvin said, holding my elbow to keep me from walking toward them. It was then that the screaming was replaced by a loud crack. All I could smell was fish. Lots of fish. Enough fish so that I hoped and prayed I would never, ever have to eat sushi again for as long as I lived. My nose burned and I swallowed hard a couple times to keep from heaving. And then Little Miss Sunshine rounded the corner. "Oh, shit!" Calvin exclaimed. And I had to agree. At first, I thought her body was facing me, but after a moment I realized that, somehow, her head had pivoted almost completely around. Her chin rested awkwardly on her shoulder blade, and she was walking backward just to see where she was going. It was like that old Exorcist movie my mom watched every year at Halloween, but this lady was real, and she was heading in our direction. She was also smiling. "Okay, F the s'mores, Sky, I'm out," Calvin said, his voice carefully even. But I wasn't moving, and neither was he. Little Miss Sunshine, on the other hand, she was getting closer. I didn't know where her sunglasses had gone, but I could see her eyes now. They were wild, and she had a terrible smile, like the Cheshire Cat had up and lost it. "Sky?" Calvin said, and I knew for a second what it must feel like to be him, absolutely paralyzed. I couldn't move my legs. I was stuck in that spot. And she was smiling at me. People began to peek out from aisle 8 to see what was happening. I spotted the old lady and the woman who had been reciting prayers. Mullet Woman at the register was quiet, too. In fact, the entire store had become terribly silent. The only sound was the canned music clinking through cheap overhead speakers. It was some terrible electronic version of an old Frank Sinatra song, complete with computerized steel drums. I swallowed hard, the smell of fish absolutely overwhelming me. "Look what I can do," the woman said and snapped her neck back around. "Oh," the Save-A-Buck crowd gasped. Little Miss Sunshine giggled. Her perfectly manicured hands held her head in place. She spun around to face me. "I've got you under my skin." The lyrics echoed eerily through the grocery store, and I looked down at Calvin for a second. He had turned a pale shade of green, which clashed with his chocolate-brown skin. "Look what I can do," the woman repeated, her voice horribly clear, her tone sing-song as if she were reciting a nursery rhyme. She clapped her palm onto the side of her face, and I watched her jaw completely dislocate. "Mommy?" one of the little kids in the register line squealed, while the Hispanic lady said something fast in Spanish and fainted. "Look what I can do, look what I can do, look what I can do," Little Miss Sunshine repeated, and this time it sounded more like "ook-at-ah-ooh," because she couldn't close her mouth. Her eyes were wide, with a disturbing amount of white showing on the top and bottom. I watched her grab the top of her mouth and pull. "I've got you deep in the heart of me." 4 of her teeth fell out and landed on the linoleum floor, close enough to my feet so that I could see.